We recently started the Christmas shopping, or by we, I really mean Mandy, my wife, who is so good at forward planning and also at finding great bargains. Now, one of these finds was a like-new children's action character vehicle playset. The seller acknowledged the purchase and dispatched the item with the following message: "Many thanks. Item will be collected on Tuesday. I have switched it off. I am sure, like me, you will be grateful for the off switch." Now, part of me thought, can we send it back now? Now, noisy and annoying toys aside, I wonder if we feel that our lives can be filled with a cacophony of sound bites, opinions and requests that seem to invade our souls in a never-ending repeat. A repeat that, like the toy, we just love to switch off. Continual demands can easily produce in us a hurry sickness, where we try to do things faster, multitask even, although not very well, certainly in my case, buy labour-saving gadgets, organise more, achieve more, so that we can free up more time to, well, do more. Now, before you think, not me, there are some common symptoms that might indicate that you are on this sort of noisy loop of hurry. Let me run these past you. You may find yourself rushing at times when there's just no need to. You switch lanes in a traffic jam because you're doing complex mental calculations to try and work out which one will get you where you want to go first. You continually think of more ways of squeezing more into your schedule. You drive, let's be honest, sometimes as quickly as you can get away with. You find yourself thinking of the next thing you've got to do as you're just talking to somebody. So annoying. Or the last one, you just looked at your phone in the last 30 seconds. A favourite writer and theologian, C.S. Lewis, said of this whole hurry rush thing, "It comes the very moment you wake up each morning. All your wishes and hopes for the day just rush at you like wild animals. And the first job each morning consists simply in shoving them back, in listening to that other voice, taking that other point of view, letting that other, larger, stronger, quieter life come flowing in, and so on, all day. Standing back from all your natural fussings and frettings, coming in out of the wind." I think what a wise comment. Well, today I want to talk about a man who walked at a different pace. A man who affected this planet more than anyone else has ever lived. A man who did all of his ministry over only 3 years, and yet spoke words which still speak now. A man who said to his followers, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you." And yet that peace can so easily elude us, if we're honest. And I was thinking about this. I thought, how do we evaluate whether today has been a good day? Usually, in my case, by how much I actually managed to pack into the day and get done. Jesus, however, seemed to have a very different primary measure. When I dive into the life of Jesus and look at his life in the Gospels, I'm amazed at how he handled the demands of ministry and the needs of others. Jesus' campaign trail included extended times of prayer, solitude, fasting, time with close friends, and most of all, he walked everywhere, relatively slowly. It was a hot climate, yes, I know, and at times there would be crowds, but Jesus walked. Let's think about that for the moment. God walked. God walked. Even in what I think would be critical situations, such as a severely sick friend called Lazarus or a dying girl, Jesus moved relatively slowly, too slowly for those who were around, who hurried him on if they could. In fact, as I looked through the whole of the Gospels, the only reference that I could find that used the word hurry anywhere near Jesus at all is in some translations when at Capernaum, the people try to hurry Jesus towards a cliff to throw him off it. Jesus' response is typical Jesus. He resists their hurry, and it says that he passed through them and went on his way. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, is the one word, if I could choose one word to describe Jesus' style, his whole approach to this, I think it would be this word, the word present. Jesus was always present to his Heavenly Father. Jesus was always present to other people. He was always present to his own soul, and he was present to love, joy, peace, and beauty. Now, that's not to say that Jesus wasn't active. Just read the Gospels. He was frequently busy. He achieved more than anyone. Remember those 3 years, more than anyone, but all of it was without hurrying. Now, this absence of hurry and the boundaries in Jesus' response to others was Jesus' disciplined lifestyle, always, 100%, 24/7. One of my favorite stories that illustrates this is when Jesus is asleep in a boat in Mark 4. Now, he just spent all day teaching the crowds by the Sea of Galilee. Jesus can see that there's more work to be done. There's more to be healed. There's more to be set free. And yet when evening comes, what does he do? He tells his disciples, let's go across to the other side. And so they get into a boat and sail. As they sail, Jesus rests then and falls asleep. He took time to rest. And the accounts, which are in more than one gospel, record that a violent storm comes up and the waves crash over the boat. Now, I don't know if you've ever been on a boat in such circumstances when waves are bigger than the boat, but just imagine for a moment how terrifying that must have been. And yet, Jesus still sleeps. It seems an incredible account. Eventually, the disciples in the boat are so concerned that they decide to wake him up, complaining, you need to care because we're going to drown. What does Jesus do? Well, he rises. He rebukes the wind and he says to the waves, peace, be still. What is so powerful, I think, in all of this is that Jesus lived in peace in a place of rest. And the peace that was in him affected the storm. The storm was creating panic, anxiety, and chaos. And Jesus came right against that. His internal reality, that of an unhurried life of peace, became the external reality that day when he intervened. Now we know how he did so too. He rebuked the wind. I believe that there was something in the storm that day that wasn't from God. And you may be feeling like you're in a storm today. Rather than agreeing, perhaps, that every storm is from God and with his blessing, we may find ourselves discerning that there's a time to rebuke. There's a time to come against something to cause a change. You see, Jesus brought order by his words. Jesus' words are always powerful, creative, and they cause a change. His commands to the waves were, peace, be still. And a great calm comes. Now, of course, Jesus is our example. And this story is not just an account of what happened, but a demonstration of how we are to live with what's in our hearts. Now, that's because Jesus said the kingdom is within you. And so it is to what degree the kingdom of love, of joy, and of peace is within us determines the degree of influence to whatever is around us. If we're rushed, hurried, and anxious, then what do you think we're going to leak? That's what the disciples did. I loved the fact that several of the disciples were seasoned fishermen. They knew this lake. And yet that day, they were terrified. And that's why Jesus chastises them for their lack of faith. Because faith is a heart issue, first and foremost, not a head one. The Apostle Paul later said that we believe in our heart and then confess with our words. The heart determines the course of our thinking and our speech. So today, I'd like to pose a big question for you and for me. This is the question. How do we go into that place of peace and joy and stay there? Our second question relating to it, how do we slow our anxious heart, hurried heart, to walk at the pace Jesus does? And to walk at his pace, we must, if we're going to be his disciples. Now, Jesus not only demonstrates the answer, but he explains it too. One important passage is from the book of John, chapter 15. Let me just share this with you. Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is a vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you're clean because of the word that I've spoken to you. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he's thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you may bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father's loved me, so have I loved you, Jesus says. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I've spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. Now, this is a well-known chapter. It's well known for the section just following it as well, where Jesus calls us friends. But there are also so many keys here for our dilemma that we're facing today. And the illustration that Jesus paints for our imagination, come with me now, is that of a trained vine, which is being tended by a vine dresser. Now, this was a common sight at a time when wine was a staple drink, usually mixed with water, a common daily drink. In the illustration, the Father is the vine dresser. Jesus is the vine, and we are the branches. The purpose of the vine and its branches is to bear fruit without striving. Isn't that key? And it's a natural consequence of the life within it. Now, all of this is great news for us because the outcome of this process is answered prayer. It's love and joy to us, and it's actually glory to the Father. The first two verses just set the scene. They explain that our destiny is to be fruitful, to be creative, to walk in obedience to God, and to do the things that He's commanded us to do. Now, that's significant because it means that no follower of Christ, it means that I, cannot hide behind, well, that's not for me. I'm not called. Jesus says clearly that we're all called to be fruitful in an ever-increasing way. That is our destiny. An uncomfortable point to note is that being pruned is also a key to growth. Now, in ancient cultivation of grapevines, plants would be aggressively pruned for the first 3 years, and then, after future growing seasons, pruned yet again to increase future yields. Each pruning would result in, get this, deeper roots and invigorating growth. Now, the first key is in verse 3, where Jesus says, already you're clean because of the word that I've spoken to you. See, leaf pruning or cleaning would be continuous and all the way right through to the fruit harvest. Any leaves that are in the wrong fruit to leaf ratio, and yes, that is a thing, or they were covering the ripening fruit, they would be removed. They'd just be pulled off. Now, note that in Jesus' words in our earlier story, that on the lake, that when Jesus rebuked his disciples, Jesus was actually causing change. He was pruning them. He was pruning their values. He was pruning their understanding. He was pruning their faith for future growth. And that's exactly what happened. You think how the disciples changed the world. The most poignant part, though, of all of this, I think, is probably in verse 4, where Jesus says this, abide in me, and I in you. As a branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless, Jesus says, you abide in me. What a key. And the Greek word abide here that's used means to remain, to stay, to wait for, or to await. Now, in our society, in our modern day, if you like, we celebrate action. We celebrate busyness. We celebrate packing as much as we can. And it avoids waiting at all costs. To that society, to how we live, frequently, this is a challenge. And what's so powerful, I think, about this illustration is that Jesus is using that the vine is something that grows over time. Remember, it would typically take 3 years, similar to the time of Jesus' ministry, where for a vine to initially mature, and then a vine can produce grapes on and on for decades. But it is a slow growth through seasons of summer and winter and radical pruning. I think two things are very hard hitting here for all of us. One is the pace required. Now, unlike most self-help books, there's no quick fix. There's no microwave transformation. There's no 30-day program. There's no, well, just do this, and you're done. But instead, there's a steady, there's a continuous, there's a life-giving, pruning, fruit-bearing growth. Second thing is that the life produced by the branches comes, and this is important, directly and only from the vine. Jesus says clearly that the branches cannot bear fruit by themselves. The life flow just comes all the way through from the vine. In fact, the primary responsibility of the branch is to do nothing else but to stay connected to the vine and focus all of its ability in keeping that connection, remaining there, waiting on the will of the vine. Bearing fruit, Jesus says, is just a consequence of this. It will happen. Now, we know this to be true. A vine produces grapes. It doesn't have to declare grapes. It doesn't have to fast for grapes. It doesn't have to believe for grapes. It just produces grapes. Things that smell and taste like grapes. I was fascinated as well, and I reminded myself, if you like, of Acts 4, where the rulers and the priests interrogate Peter and John for healing a crippled man in Jesus' name, which is what Jesus, of course, had commanded the disciples to do. And the priests, seeing their courage, they recognized that these men had been with Jesus. I would say that you can see that in some people. As you meet them, they look like Jesus. They smell like Jesus. What they speak tastes like Jesus. I would so like to be able to pass the sniff test, that there's a fragrance of Christ around me. Jesus said in verse 7 then, "If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you." This is a truly remarkable statement, and one which, if we can embrace it today, can change our lives forever. When in the vine and with God's word alive in us, Jesus here invites us, he openly invites us to ask for whatever grows in our hearts from his will, and it will be done. The key to getting things done, therefore, starts with not a to-do list, but by simply waiting in the vine. And Jesus goes on to say that this gives glory to God, and it shows that we really are his disciples. Now, I think there's something really prophetically on this right now. Last month, the press has announced a £9.3 million architectural project just outside Birmingham called the Eternal Wall of Answered Prayer, which is a continuous looped wall of 1 million bricks. Each brick tells the story of an answered prayer made by a disciple of Jesus. You see, God will be glorified, just as Jesus declared here. God will be glorified through answered prayer from those who are in the vine. And then in verses 9 and 10, Jesus says, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love." So here Jesus says we're to remain in, to stay in, to await the love of Jesus in just the same way that we are to abide in the vine. But here there's also a call to action, something we're to do. Jesus is saying that we are to be discipled or disciplined to keep his commandments, just as he was disciplined with the Father in a very similar way. Remember that Jesus walked, not hurried. He was, remember that word, present. He wasn't absent. He lived simply. His whole focus was on that connection with the Father. And Jesus protects that. He protected that above all, to the point where he said he would do nothing of himself, only what he saw his Father doing. This section concludes in verse 11 with, "These things I have spoken to you, that my joy will be in you and that your joy will be full." I'm just going to go back to C.S. Lewis again. Lewis says, God cannot give us happiness and peace apart from himself, because it is not there. There is no such thing. Incredible words. And this is what Jesus is saying. He's saying, if you want to be happy, if you want to have the fullness of joy, then there's no other way apart from abiding in me. Abiding in my love by being disciplined in my commandments, and then you will have the fullness of the joy of Jesus. Yesterday, I talked to others about some good things that had actually come about because of the lockdown. And one thing that was fairly universal was actually, for all of us, it had slowed us down. It had simplified life to some degree, and that had presented new opportunities for connection with God. It had presented new opportunities for being present with Him. It had been new opportunities for that abiding that I'm talking about right now. And so I'd like to finish with a few practical things, because what we need, I think, is to be like Jesus, disciplined, to slow down, to be present, so that we can be in the vine. And also in, out of the wind, as C.S. Lewis said. So we need to be disciplined, I think, to bring our need for speed into check. Some things that may discipline ourselves are these. Okay, so some practical pointers. These may sound odd. You won't find them in the Bible, but I think they are interesting, so go with me. First one, why don't we drive at the speed limit? I know, not less than the speed limit, but certainly not above it. Why don't we just drive at the speed limit? So let that regulate us. Not as much as we can get away with. Secondly, why don't we sometimes join the slow lane on purpose and just stay in the slow lane? Thirdly, why don't we make sure that we never use our phone and drive? Now, I know that's illegal, but I know also that for many of us it's so tempting, isn't it? Just to make a quick glance at our phone, to do that. Let's just settle it. We will not do that ever. We'll not have our phone on. We'll not have it available in the car, and we won't be distracted with it. Here's one that you might hate me for. Why do we occasionally join the longest queue in the shops? What that does, it just breaks our need for speed. It slows us down. And what about this one? Why don't we dumb down our smartphone? I've had a go at this recently. I've changed my color scheme to black on my phone. I've minimized a lot of items on it. What I've done is I've taken email off it, so I've limited what it does and what it communicates to me. Take off all news alerts, because that's not good. All those things, those busy alerts that just demand our time and attention. Why don't we also do something radical and put our phones to bed? So at night time, turn them off or put them on silent mode. You know that most people do, first thing in the morning, is that they pick up their phone and check their phone before they do anything else. Why don't we single task rather than multitask? Single tasking is really what we all do anyway. I think multitasking is a definition really of just doing multiple things badly. And I'd just like to suggest a way of praying as we come to a point of closing. Richard Foster explains that in our busy, hectic world, it's easy to run from one thing to the next without much thought of God's presence and purpose in our daily life. There's a prayer called the prayer of examen, which is Latin, I know, for examine, and it emerged in the 16th century as a way to help believers like you and I to recognize instances of God's grace, to those points of being present to God's grace in the course of the day that's just ended. And what it was doing, it was learning to give attention to those points, learning to give attention to God's grace. And we can do that in various areas. So this is how the prayer of examining would work. First of all, at the end of the day, there would be a time where you would just think of gratitude, looking back over the day for all of the goodness of God that you'd experienced during the day, whatever sort that may be, with events, experiences, ideas, encounters, conversations, God's provision, or in any other way, and just acknowledging those and just thanking God for those times. Also, why don't we think back over our day and think of times where we may have been aware of God's presence at different points during the day, in the many and varied ways in which He could meet us. So in His Word is one example. In nature's beauty is another. It's taking time to literally see the sunset. In other people, and also in any other area that we encounter, His presence just speaking to us, whispering to us. And finally, what about confession at the end of the day of any sin of omission, of anything we should have done but we didn't, or anything that we have done that we shouldn't have done, which may have displeased God and may have just quenched something of the Holy Spirit, sensitive to the Holy Spirit and power in our lives, anything in our thoughts, anything in our deeds, anything in our words, and just think over those things and just confess those things to God. It's just examining that day, and as we have a life that's more examined, then we'll see increasing breakthrough. And what we'll do is we'll be more and more connected and abiding. We'll force our hearts to slow down so that we move like Jesus at a walking pace with our relationship with God. Thank you.